Du bist tiefer in den Alkohol abgerutscht. Bin an Drogen geraten, weil er...
Ich wollte ihm helfen, von den Drogen wegzukommen. Und beim Versuch, ihm zu helfen, bin ich selbst davon
There are
abgekommen.
child stars who fade into nostalgia, remembered fondly, but rarely heard from again. And then there is Tanya Tucker, who never faded at all. She simply refused to. From the moment she stepped in front of a microphone as a barely teenage girl with a voice that sounded decades older than she was, she has spent more than 50 years living exactly the way she wanted, no matter who approved and who didn't. She has been called a prodigy, a wild child, a cautionary tale, a survivor, and finally, a living legend. All of those labels are true. None of them tell the whole story. So take a breath, because the journey from a dusty Texas childhood to a Grammy stage at 61, and everything in between, is a lot to take in. Tanya Denise Tucker was born on October 10, 1958, in Seminole, Texas, the youngest of 3 children in a family that never stayed in one place for long. Her father, Bo Tucker, worked as a heavy equipment operator, and the family followed the work across the American Southwest, from Texas to Arizona to Nevada. Wherever they landed, one thing stayed constant: music. In Wilcox, Arizona, the family lived near a radio station that played country music around the clock, and young Tanya absorbed every note of it. She has said that by the age of 8, she already knew exactly what she wanted to be. Not a teacher, not a nurse, not anything ordinary. She wanted to be a country singer, and she said it with a certainty that most adults never manage to summon for anything. Her father believed her. That belief became the engine of everything that followed. Bo Tucker didn't just support his daughter's dream. He built his life around it, eventually becoming her manager and her fiercest advocate in an industry that had no idea what to do with a girl her age. Before she ever cut a record, she got a small taste of show business in front of a camera, landing a bit part alongside her horse in the 1972 Robert Redford film Jeremiah Johnson. But music was always the real goal, and with a demo tape and her father's relentless pushing, 13-year-old Tanya found her way in front of producer Billy Sherrill, one of the most powerful men in Nashville. He signed her to Columbia Records, and just like that, a childhood ended and a career began. Her first single, Delta Dawn, was released in 1972 and shot into the country top 10 almost immediately. It's easy to forget now just how strange that moment was for the industry. Here was a song steeped in heartbreak and longing, delivered with the kind of gravel and ache usually associated with singers twice her age, and it was coming out of the mouth of a 7th grader. Reportedly, the label tried to downplay her age at first, worried that audiences wouldn't accept something so raw from someone so young. It backfired spectacularly. Once people realized how old she actually was, the fascination only intensified. She wasn't just another young singer with a novelty appeal, like some of the child performers who had come before her. She sang with a depth that made people forget she was a kid at all, right up until they remembered, and then it became impossible to look away. The hits didn't slow down. What's Your Mama's Name and Blood Red and Going Down both reached number 1 in 1973. Tanya Tucker, barely a teenager, was officially a star. By the time she was 15, Tanya had already recorded a song that made grown adults uncomfortable. Would You Lay With Me in a Field of Stone, written by outlaw songwriter David Allan Coe, was steeped in adult longing, and its subject matter caused a stir precisely because of who was singing it. Tanya never flinched from the criticism. She described the song as something closer to a wedding vow than anything scandalous, and insisted that any discomfort said more about the listener than about her. That response, defending her own artistic choices without apology, would become a defining trait for the rest of her life. The attention that came with her fame didn't stay confined to the music industry. Tanya has spoken over the years about being pursued by adult men who saw an opportunity in her sudden stardom, including stories about Elvis Presley taking an interest in her before apparently backing off once he understood how young she really was. By 16, she was already embroiled in a bitter contract dispute, eventually leaving Columbia and producer Billy Sherrill behind for a reported $1 million deal with MCA Records. She was negotiating life-changing money as a teenager, all while singing about adult desire and heartbreak, and all while an entire industry watched her every move. Success kept arriving. Lizzie and the Rainmen and San Antonio Stroll became major hits in 1975. But the cost of that success was quietly building. She wasn't growing up in a classroom or a childhood bedroom. She was growing up on stages and in tour buses and in the pages of gossip columns, and that kind of adolescence asks far more of a person than it should. Her father had worried, long before any of this started, about what the business could do to a young girl. He would turn out to be right. In 1978, at 18 years old, Tanya released the album TNT, and it changed the conversation around her entirely. Gone was any lingering image of the sweet-voiced child star. The cover showed her in tight red leather, and the music inside leaned hard into rock and roll energy that unsettled the more traditional corners of the country music world. For Tanya, it wasn't a mistake or a phase. It was a declaration. She was done being packaged into whatever shape made other people comfortable, and she wanted full control of her own image, even if it meant alienating part of her audience. The album went gold, proof that there was a real appetite for this bolder version of her, even as some longtime fans and industry figures balked. She would later reflect, with a mix of pride and something closer to rueful honesty, that she lived the kind of life many people secretly wished they had the nerve to live. She wasn't interested in quiet or careful. She wanted everything all at once, and for a long stretch of her 20s, that's exactly what she got. Behind the swagger, something much heavier was taking root. Tanya has spoken candidly about how her drinking escalated in her late teens, and the reason she's given is simple and devastating: loneliness. Night after night on the road, she would perform in front of crowds who adored her, feel that wave of love and energy pouring toward her from a packed room, and then walk off stage into an empty hotel room where none of that noise followed her. The silence after the applause was where the trouble started. In 1978, she moved to Los Angeles, hoping to break into pop music the way some of her country contemporaries had. That crossover moment never fully materialized, but the city's nightlife did plenty of damage on its own. She would later describe that period with a kind of dark bravado, claiming she could outdrink and outparty anyone in the room. Underneath the bravado, her life was sliding toward real danger. Tabloids fed on her romances, linking her name to country legend Merle Haggard, actor Don Johnson, and pop singer Andy Gibb, among others. But one relationship would come to define this era of her life more than any other. In the early 1980s, still only in her early 20s, Tanya began a turbulent and highly publicized relationship with Glenn Campbell, the superstar behind Rhinestone Cowboy, who was more than 2 decades her senior and freshly out of marriage. The public devoured every detail. On stage, their chemistry was undeniable, most visibly in their 1980 duet on the Bobby Darin classic Dream Lover. Offstage, it was a different story entirely. Substance abuse surrounded both of them, and the power imbalance between a young star and an older, established one created a volatile mix. There were extravagant gestures, including a reported $57,000 birthday celebration Campbell threw for her 22nd birthday, and a brief engagement with real talk of marriage. But there were also frequent, explosive fights, and the relationship eventually turned physically violent, leading Tucker to later file a lawsuit against Campbell over an incident in which she alleged he knocked out one of her teeth. The whole affair lasted only about 15 months before collapsing under its own weight. Decades later, the two of them would describe it in strikingly different terms. Campbell, in a 2002 interview, spoke about it with cool detachment, saying they'd never really been suited to each other, and that she'd simply been present during the unraveling of his marriage. In his autobiography, he referred to the relationship as poisoned and called it, in his own words, his insanity. Tucker's memory of it carried far more warmth, even while she was honest about how damaging it had been. She called Campbell the great love of her life, while admitting she'd been far too young for someone that intense, and that she'd known exactly which buttons of his to push. When Campbell died from complications of Alzheimer's disease in August of 2017, after a long and public battle with the illness, that old, complicated love still seemed to live somewhere inside her. By the time the Campbell relationship ended in 1982, Tanya's life was unraveling on multiple fronts. Her career was cooling, her personal life was in chaos, and a move to Arista Records left her, by her own account, without any clear direction. She drifted into roughly 5 years of heavy drinking and cocaine use that she could not pull herself out of alone. The rebellious image that had once fueled her outlaw mystique was now dragging her toward genuine ruin. It was her father who finally delivered the hardest truth. While helping her move from California back to Nashville, Bo Tucker told her directly that the Wild Child headlines had done real damage, and that landing a new record deal was going to be extremely difficult because of the reputation she'd built. She was barely in her mid-20s, and people in the industry were already speaking about her career in the past tense, treating a woman not yet 25 like a burned-out relic. Most performers her age were just getting started. Tanya was already being written off. Her parents, who had built their lives around her career from the beginning, stepped in again, ready to do whatever it took to help her recover. Somewhere inside all of that wreckage was a resilience that kept resurfacing. In 1988, after years of concern, her family confronted her and pushed her toward treatment. She checked into the Betty Ford Center, the recovery clinic founded by the former First Lady, and that decision reshaped the rest of her life. 2 years earlier, she had already begun clawing her way back professionally, signing with Capitol Records and scoring a top 5 hit with One Love at a Time in 1986. Her album Girl Like Me produced 4 top 10 singles, and Just Another Love gave her a #1 hit for the first time in a decade. After 10 years of commercial struggle, she had found her footing again, and by 1988 the comeback accelerated even further, with 3 #1 hits that year alone, followed by a run of 8 consecutive top 10 singles, stretching into 1989. None of that professional resurrection would have held without the personal one underneath it. And in 1991, everything came together in a moment that felt almost too dramatic to be real. Tanya won the Country Music Association's Female Vocalist of the Year award, the biggest honor of her career to that point. On that very same night, she gave birth to her son. The industry that had all but given up on her was celebrating her at the exact moment she was becoming a mother for the second time. Tanya built her family life the same way she built everything else, without asking anyone's permission. She never married, and never treated that as something to apologize for. Her first 2 children, daughter Presley Tanita, born in 1989, and son Bo Grayson, born in 1991, were fathered by actor Ben Reed. She spoke openly about the difficulties of single motherhood, while also expressing real respect for women who raised children without the resources her success afforded her. Her 3rd child arrived through a turn of events that felt entirely in character. After an on-again, off-again relationship with musician and producer Jerry Lasseter, the two were finally preparing to marry in 1999 when Tanya discovered she was pregnant just days before the ceremony. She called off the wedding rather than walk down the aisle visibly pregnant, and her daughter, Layla Lacosta, was born that June. In 2005, TLC's reality series Tuckerville gave audiences a direct look at her life in Tennessee, showing fans the humor, grit, and everyday chaos of a country legend raising her kids on her own terms. The 1990s kept her productive, with hits like 2 Sparrows in a Hurricane and soon climbing the charts, but as the decade wore on, the momentum slowly faded. Over her full career, she would rack up more than 20 top 40 albums, dozens of top 40 singles, 10 #1 hits on the Billboard country charts, and multiple CMA, ACM, and CMT awards. She even built a parallel career as an accomplished cutting horse competitor. But through much of the 2000s and early 2010s, new music from her became rare, and her 2002 album Tanya stood as her last collection of original material for the next 17 years. She remained beloved, but she had settled into the role of a legacy artist rather than a current force in the genre. There was one painful misstep during this period worth remembering honestly, because it shows how complicated these years were for her. When Glenn Campbell died in 2017, Tucker released a tribute single the day before his funeral, and the timing struck many people as exploitative rather than heartfelt. Criticism intensified after the organization, she said, would receive proceeds from a song publicly stated it had no involvement in the release and had received no funds from it. It was a rough public moment, arriving while she was genuinely grieving a complicated old love, all under the same scrutiny that had followed her for decades. Almost nobody saw what was coming next. The turning point arrived through Shooter Jennings, son of outlaw legend Waylon Jennings, who wanted to produce a new Tanya Tucker record, and reached out to singer-songwriter Brandi Carlile for material. Carlile, it turned out, had idolized Tucker for years, viewing her as one of her earliest musical heroes. Jennings brought her on to co-produce the entire project alongside him. The result, While I'm Livin', released in 2019, marked Tucker's first album of original material in 17 years. Carlile and her longtime collaborators Phil and Tim Hanseroth wrote songs specifically for Tucker's voice, honoring its warmth, its age, and the ache that had always made it distinctive, drawing directly from the hard-lived reality of her own story. The result was more than just a strong record. It was an act of generosity from a younger generation of artists determined to honor a living legend while she was still around to feel that appreciation. Critics who had long filed Tucker away as a figure of the past suddenly heard her with fresh ears, and audiences responded to the honesty and weight carried in every track. Then came the moment that made it all feel complete. At the 2020 Grammy Awards, Tanya Tucker won Best Country Album for While I'm Livin' and Best Country Song for Bring My Flowers Now, the first Grammy wins of her entire career, arriving 48 years after she first started recording. She was 61 years old. She had been nominated before and had never won. Standing on that stage at last, decades of being overlooked finally gave way to recognition that matched what her talent had always deserved. The comeback grew into something bigger than a great album cycle. In 2022, the documentary The Return of Tanya Tucker, featuring Brandi Carlile, was released worldwide, following her resurgence with real closeness and honesty and drawing praise for capturing the emotional force still present in her voice. For younger audiences who knew Carlile but not Tucker, the film and the album opened a door into one of country music's most important artists. For longtime fans, it felt like a homecoming they had stopped believing would ever actually happen. Today, at 67, Tanya Tucker carries herself like someone who has walked through fire and come out the other side holding the prize. Since her Grammy wins, she hasn't slowed down, she has expanded. In 2023, she released another widely praised album, Sweet Western Sound, again produced by Carlile and Jennings, and that same year, she was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame, cementing her place among the genre's permanent greats. She made her acting debut in a lead role in a Paramount holiday film in late 2022, and she has continued performing on major stages, touring steadily through 2025 and into 2026. Fans who catch her live shows often say her voice sounds as powerful and controlled as ever, if not more so, carrying the confidence of everything she has survived. Her business instincts have sharpened alongside her music. Her tequila brand has expanded across more than a dozen U.S. states and into Canada, a fitting venture for a woman whose breakout album was literally called TNT. In 2024, she extended that into a pop-up cantina bar in Nashville, and that same year, she received recognition for her philanthropic work supporting breast cancer research. Through it all, she remains surrounded by family, with her children joining her on stage and audiences embracing the next generation of Tuckers, carrying her music forward. The woman once told she'd probably never get signed again. The woman who had to get sober at Betty Ford. The woman an entire industry dismissed as a relic before she'd even turned 25. She now stands at the center of a life that spans generations, genres, and businesses, one of the most respected living legends in American music. Between songs, she still tells stories about the outlaws she came up alongside, Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, Hank Williams Jr., and then she launches into set after set of hits that refuse to be dated. At an age when many of her peers have long since stepped back, Tanya Tucker is still out there, still wanted, and still entirely, unmistakably in charge of her own story.